So the construction costs are going to be the costs associated with the material that gets placed into the building, right? We talked a little bit about that. It's if you take a building, you turn it upside down and you shake it, anything that doesn't fall out is the construction costs, right? It's the cost for the in-place materials put into place by the contractor. On top of those costs, right, you have to pay the general conditions, and those general conditions are going to be all of the costs that go into associated labor to do the work and the overhead, right? The utilities, the temporary office trailers, the dumpsters, all of that kind of stuff, right? They're also going to look at the required ADA upgrades. Every time you do some work, the state of California is going to look in and make sure that you keep pace with your accessibility upgrades. We can cap those at 20% because we can start to say if the ADA upgrades exceed 20% of the project costs, we can file for a hardship. But that then goes onto a list that then you have to pick up the next time. You have to pick right up where you left off for your next project. So they're going to always kind of want you to look at those 20%. And then you have the project soft cost, right? Those are the costs that you're going to pay your architects, your construction managers. You're going to pay your inspectors, your testing labs, your independent inspectors, and then also the moving expenses. Those are just sort of the costs that don't go directly to the contractor or any sort of built portion of the built environment. It's going to be the administrative costs that you have to put onto those projects. So when we talk about these things, we always want to talk total project, or I believe we always want to talk total project. We don't want to get an idea that the construction costs are going to be $1 million, and then on top of that we have another $300,000 of soft costs. We always want to start talking total project to make sure that we are proactively and wisely plan to do that. So when we talk about that $83 million, that is a total project cost with the soft cost built into it. Yeah. You are going to face, and we can pop back in here, one of the things that this you're going to always kind of want to revisit this, right? We talk about this as a process because one of the things that we always want to keep pace with is inflation. All right. And many factors can drive that. We've just gone through a period of incredible inflation. We're still in one. And so we always kind of want to come back and look at this as a process to check back in on. That list is a living document with you, your construction managers, and we can always come back in and update that list because we do have now a living document there. Okay, so we want to talk about proactive planning, right? We have the $83 million. We have the large project list. We wanted to talk about how to make that prioritized in a way that best represents the goals of the district. And so what we did was we developed a project prioritization matrix and then assigned point values to that, right? The categories, we took input from both the committees and the board and staff. The prioritization ranking, we took feedback from the committees, the board, and the staff, and as well as the final layout of all of that. So one of the things that we did was we came along and we said, this is a rundown of sort of those rankings, some of the feedback we got. We came along and we said, instead of these 8 categories, let's just look at these 7 categories. We're in a state of declining enrollment, so we don't really need to look at classroom expansion, and our ancillary facilities are adequately sized, right? So let's look at these 7 categories, and let's take this matrix and let's apply it quantifiably to all of our projects, right? That led us to an overwhelming spreadsheet that we talked about, right? But each one of these now, we can go back in. Every single one of those projects is laid out on the left-hand column. And you have a link to that, or you should have a link to it by now. And then to the right of it is that prioritization matrix where each one of these, through a pretty simple statement of a yes or no, generates a total project score, right? And then we have the total budget, both hard and soft. And then we look for the eligibility of state funding. This is a living document, and we can click in and go in there if you'd like. But it is a living document that everyone should have access to on the board now. So we can go in and look at those. And if you, through your review of this, would like some of these prioritizations changed, if you think maybe we have something right or wrong, you can always pass that information back to Dr. Vang, and we'll make those changes for you. It is a living document. It is intended to grow and change. Right? It is intended to be something that we add projects to and then successfully take projects from when they're completed. And we always want to just kind of reevaluate that and check in to make sure that's still the same lens we want to evaluate all these projects through. You can also kind of come back in and do a quick cost update of all of those projects as well. And we can have all the backup information from that because we built that database with your construction managers. That's the link to that. It should live link to that, but it's also been passed along to you by Dr. Vang. So you have that, you can review that. And then again, any changes you'd like made, we can, but that will then help you generate a ranked score for any one of these projects because indeed, all of these projects are not equal. Right? Some of them need to be done, but they might not necessarily represent something that affects the life safety of students, and we want to prioritize those projects first. So you can go through that database. We can make any changes that we like, and it's really going to help you sort of take that list and that full 83 million and whittle it down to what you might want to see as those essentials or some that you can even maybe exclude down to the lowers of we'll get to it when we can get to it. One of the things that's very, very common, and we will reiterate, you, like every other school district in the state of California, has need that far exceeds your available funding. That is consistent across the state, right? Every single school district has this list. Every single school district is not actively working to solve the list. So the fact that you're here actively working to solve this list, I think we should all be we should be commended for and make sure that we're moving forward well, because not every school district will go in and do the work you've just done to get this list, because it is a big, scary number, right? And so we'll work diligently to get that prioritized so that we know that our dollars go to the best, highest use for the students. And you'll always have sort of accountability back to this list for that. Funding opportunities. I'm going to turn this over to April, who has the fun job of finding you money to make that $83 million a bit more manageable.
Thank you, Trent. We have had the privilege to work with the district for a number of years. We over at King, and so the district has been very active in a number of the projects under the state school facility program. Historically, this is your participation in this program, and you've received over $13 million in the programs that are listed below in the new construction, joint use, facility hardship, modernization, as well as the career technical education grants. Right now, we've calculated your modernization eligibility. You have collectively about $18.2 million that you're eligible for from the state. That would require a $12.1 million district match. And that's throughout. It would require a $12.1 million district match. The modernization program is what's called a 60-40 program. So the state will kick in 60% of your total project costs, and the district is responsible for the remaining 40%. So we calculated your modernization eligibility, and then we went and looked at the projects that you've completed over the last few years to see what we can get you in line for right away, because the modernization program is a first in, first out. So we have submitted a couple of funding applications on your behalf and are working on a couple of more. So your remaining eligibility is about $5.5 million from the state, and the district would be responsible to come up with a $3.7 million share. You also have some new construction eligibility, which may not be a need right now, but we wanted to make sure that we present you with all of your opportunities. So you have about $1 million from the state in new construction eligibility if you had a need to create new capacity for your severe student population, and then the district would be required. This is a 50-50 program, so the district will be required to match the state share with the same amount. So $1 million from the state and $1 million state or district match. Looking ahead at the state funding outlook over the last few years, the last Prop 51 bond had run out at the state level, and so the governor and the legislators had been moving money over, allocating it from the general fund into the statewide school facility program to keep these applications moving and continue to get them funded. Right now, that intent language for the additional $875 million from the general fund appropriation, that has been, first it was reduced down to $375 in the January budget proposal, and now in the May revise, that could be eliminated entirely. So we're looking ahead to November at that next statewide school bond, that $14 million bond that we think is going to come from AB 247 to be on the ballot in November. Knowing that the current bond authority has been exhausted, and those general fund allocations are well on their way to being also completely exhausted, and then the future allocations have been reduced or eliminated, we want to look back at the historical funding of the SFP program since its inception in 1998, when the first legislation was passed. There has consistently been funding in this program to keep those applications moving. The governor throughout the years, whichever governor it may be, and also the state legislators, understand that this is a critical need. This program is critically needed by school districts in order to even get close to funding their facilities needs. There are a couple of different ways that you can have find funding for your facilities. In the industry, they call it sort of the three-legged stool. You have developer fees, local funding, like a general obligation bond, parcel taxes, redevelopment funds, that kind of thing, as well as your state and federal funding. Without those three legs of that stool, it makes it nearly impossible for districts to fund their capital facility needs.
Can you tell me what redevelopment funds are again, please?
That would be local funding for if your city or your county was, had some redevelopment funds, had a redevelopment committee and was going to go in. It's really driven by your city and county agencies.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So then next steps goes over to Trent. Is there any question on the funding side?
So if the November ballot, the AB 247 with that's iffy whether it's going to be on the ballot or not. Where does that stand? I mean, whether it's
Right
gonna
now, it's still in committee. The governor has said at every budget press conference that he's had that he is in support of it. They are hammering out the details right now. There are some conversations around changing some of the regulations, just that could be a benefit to St. Helena, could be prioritizing districts that are considered small school districts under 2,500 in enrollment. So there are some regulations that are still sort of being hammered out in a discussion, but we expect to see a response in the coming weeks, hopefully, that's going to move forward.
Okay. And so if then that passes, then is that a pass of 66%? Is that what that is, a 3/4%? Or
I think it's a 55%. Yeah,
50,
it's a
55%,
55%, I believe. Yes.
Okay. And then with that, then does that money then start filling up the buckets again?
Yes, that money is what funds the statewide school facility program. So then we have that remaining bond authority that goes back up and funds the applications that are currently in line, and then picks up the new applications as they come in. There's outside of the current authority, there's about $5 billion that are stacked up now. So even if that $14 billion passes, they fund all of those $5 billion that's sitting in line on modernization and new construction applications. There's still another $9 billion that's going to be there to spend, and then, so we encourage districts to continue getting in line.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we are. In fact, in June, you'll see another contract for King Consulting to continue with our application so that we always have an application in line.
Yes.
And is it then, how much do they determine, like, a district gets by the size of the district then? Is that how they usually
So
determine
there's a
the
different
funding?
there are a number of different programs sort of under that umbrella of statewide school facility program. So a lot of what you have is modernization eligibility in that program. That your eligibility is based on the age of your facilities. So when your buildings were constructed at each individual site and your enrollments. So new construction is based on your available capacity and how many kids you have. If you have more kids than you have space to put them, then that generates your new construction eligibility. If you have more space, then the kids that, it doesn't produce a need to have new construction eligibility to create new capacity for those kids. So there's different qualifiers and eligibility regulations for each program.
Mm-hmm. So ours would be more of the modernization.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
cut
it's good. Sorry, I'm getting confused. A bond? No. Whatever's on the ballot, the AB 247. Sorry, I'm looking. I know you wrote it down. AB 247 doesn't pass. Is there the applications we currently have may not get funded?
They may not get
Alone
funded.
anything in
We
the
are
future.
confident, though, in looking at the historical, the historical funding of this program, that even when the last bond didn't pass, and that was in 2020, it was the first bond in the history of the state of California that didn't pass for schools. For school facilities. Even then, the governor and the legislatures understood the importance of this program and made those general fund allocations annually until they were able to put a new bond on the ballot. So we're confident that there will be funding continuously in this program. Where it comes from, whether it be a bond or another, another source, we'll have to see.
Okay, thank you.
In 2020, was there like a competing thing on the ballot with that?
There
the
were a
reason why it didn't
lot of
pass?
concerns around that
Yeah,
2020
there's
ballot.
competition. Yeah,
I mean,
that's what I was thinking.
global pandemic, it was labeled Prop 13, which was unfortunate. So that really opened the door for a major misinformation campaign to come out against that, across the state. So there were a number of issues, and thankfully Prop 13 has now been retired. Nobody gets stuck with that anymore throughout the state. So, but that was I think the big detractor for that.
Okay, thank you.
And April, just to clarify, for St. Helena, most of our eligibility will fall under modernization. But even with modernization, depending on whether the program is a 60-40, a 50-50 contribution, the district still has to put in their contribution, correct?
Yes.
So it's not money that the state, let's say that the bond passes in November and there's 14 billion, but 5 of that is for the projects, for the applications that are already in line, and there's like 9 billion left. Even that money isn't just going to go to districts. It's going to be based on applications and matches, right?
Yes, exactly. Every program under the state's SFP umbrella requires a district match, whether it be modernization, new construction, even facility hardship. Every program requires a district match.
April, on the SFP program, can you talk to me about joint use and what does that entail?
So
do
joint
we have
use-
any joint use options?
Again, that really comes down to local funding. So that would be a partnership that you would have with your community. It might be your city if you have a joint use agreement, or sometimes the county. Sometimes, like, it might be a parks district. If you have a joint use agreement for a field or some piece of property, sometimes that can generate revenue if you're renting it out, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So I guess, and this is just it's probably more of an internal CBO question, but I guess what comes back to us is whatever we qualify for and we know we have to match, we have to figure out where those matching dollars are coming from and where we're going to pull them, and do we have them? Do I understand that correctly?
Correct.
Okay.
You're spot on.
Just want to make sure my brain is thinking on the right track. Okay.
And your question, President Pelosi, is actually going to lead to our next section after Trent goes over next steps.
Perfect. Thank you.
Your question actually leads perfectly into the next steps, all right? So what do we have to do from here, right? We want to continue to refine and develop that project planning matrix. We want to finalize the short-term implementation plan, right? 83 million is a lot, and so what we want to do is go through that prioritization matrix and really dial in which projects we want to focus on as sort of our short-term implementation plan. With an implementation plan, we can take those budgets, we can tie them to schedules, and really look at how to achieve and accomplish the first section of projects that we want to do. We're also going to have to talk about how to address the local funding requirement for future funding applications. April said it is the three-legged stool, that there is a component that has to come from you. We have talked about that a couple times. In order to access these funds, we have to bring to the table our local money. And then as we move forward, work with the facilities team to address any future facility concerns. We can work with Greystone to make sure that if anything comes up, we'll make sure that that gets worked into the matrix to create a living document that, again, is always sort of growing and then refocused as need to if the vision changes of the district. So now that you have that proactive tool, we want to keep that up to date. That's where I see sort of the next steps concluding, and I'll hand that back over to Dr. Bang.
Thank you. So As you've heard, with the state funding program, we still have to have a match. King Consulting has been doing a great job putting in our applications, so we have several applications in line. We know that we have needs here, and that our needs far exceed the funding that we do have. So I've part of the team presentation today, Jeff Pickey is actually going to go over our local funding. So we wanted to give you an opportunity to provide you with information regarding a general obligation bond and to provide you with information so that if the board chooses to explore that, we have information that you can access, and where the team is more than happy to provide additional information. But Jeff, why don't you go ahead and share what your presentation? And Erica is MIA. We need the other presentation. Yeah, there you go.
Is that on?
While that's happening, I will hand out there was a slide that was missing, and so I'm gonna
It's torn out, so I apologize for the tear at the upper left-hand corner, but I realize you already had the presentation. This was one page I'd inserted in there before you received it. And is this on? Because I know someone said we're recording, so I want to make sure. Okay. Trent, can you pass the clicker, please? Let's make sure I do this right. Okay. So we'll walk through this, and similar to the prior presentation, feel free to stop me throughout the presentation. Anytime you have a question, it always works better when, if you have something come up, ask it, make this a conversation. Let's get into it. I'm here to answer any questions you have or address any concerns even.
Thank you.
So we'll simply walk through this. And if you could let me know or remind me if you've seen some of this information before about just the general overview of school district bonds and how they work.
I would say not this existing. We have.
I'll go through it, and I'll go through at a decent pace. Stop me if you need me to.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, just a little background of ISOM advisors. I'm going to keep this one real brief. We've been doing this a long time. We're the #1 school district advisor in the state. I've been doing this over 20 years. So we've seen a lot. We've worked with a lot of districts. We've worked with a lot of districts in the county, or some of there's not a ton of districts in the county, but we've worked with many of the districts in the county and surrounding counties and their general obligation bond programs. Okay. So I'm going to start here because this is a background of how school district bonds work. School district bonds are repaid by local property taxes, hence called local funding. School district GO bonds are specifically for facilities. You cannot use them for operations. There are things called parcel taxes out there that you can use. It's another local funding source, but those can be used for operations, salaries, benefits, those types of items. Again, with the bonds, facilities only, and infrastructure. You could use technology, that type of stuff. So, like I said, the school district bonds are repaid with local property taxes. Property taxes are based on what is called the assessed valuation. It's a term not used a lot. Not a lot of people know it unless you're in the business. But we like to point it out because the assessed valuation of all the taxable properties in the district, in your case, this last year, adds up to about $11 billion. I want to make something a little clear here, a distinction between what is the assessed value that is in part of the calculation to repay the property or to pay property taxes and repay bonds. There's a difference between the assessed value and your market value. Okay? Market value, for example, is something is the number that you could go out and sell your home for. If I went out and had a home, sold it for $1 million, that's the market value. The assessed value could be a different number, and it could be something much lower. So, for example, someone who had lived in the district for 50 years bought their home 50 years ago. Let's just say $50,000. I like the 50s. If they stayed in that home for the entire past 50 years, their assessed value can only increase 2% every year because of Prop 13 from the 1970s. So their assessed value might be much, much lower than a market value. Their assessed value at this point might be, let's say $100,000, where again, you could go sell it for $1 million. The reason I like to point that out and make that distinction is because when people repay their property taxes, we set a tax rate, which is basically a percentage of the assessed value. That typically lower number. It's not a percentage of the market value. So people are paying, so the people who have owned their homes for 50 years benefit from a low assessed value, so their taxes are going to be lower. And again, I like to point that out because there is a difference and a distinction. People think, oh, my homes are $1 million, $2 million. I got to pay this huge tax on it. Well, yes, you have to still pay a tax, but it's not as big as you typically think. On the right-hand box is just a history of the bonding program in the district. You've passed a couple bonds historically with very good community support. You've spent all the funds from those elections, so you have no remaining local funds. And then that last bullet point, just to set the stage and talking about those tax rates. Current property owners are paying about $40 per $100,000. We usually look at it as a dollar per 100,000 of assessed value. So $1 million home would be paying $400 a year. Okay? I'm just going to quickly stop there and see if there are any questions. I'll get into a little more detail of the tax rates and the assessed value in just a moment, and really what that means for you guys. Okay, no questions?
I'm just curious. So the 85% difference, the growth since 2013 has grown because the property has changed over? They've been sold?
So
is that why?
Yeah, the way the property values work is, the assessed value, increases 2% a year unless there's a change in ownership.
Right.
Then it's reassessed at that new sale value. So someone who just bought a home last year, their assessed value and their property value, their market value is probably pretty close. Good question. If there's major construction, there's rules about that, but typically big construction projects on a home will change. They'll reassess the value as well. Then jump to the next page. And really, what does this mean to the district? So again, we focus on that assessed value because that's what's repaying the property taxes. You guys have a very strong, very large tax base at $11 billion, over $11 billion. So that means that tax base can support a good-sized bond program. And I know we're talking about numbers in the $80 million range. On this page right here, where we show at various different tax rates how much your community can support in general obligation bonds. So at a $15 tax rate, and I'll get into some of the details and what that means in a sec, but at a $15 tax rate, your community can support $63 million worth of bonds. Okay, so $63 million in projects. At $19, $80.1 million it can raise. And at a $25 tax rate, $106 million that your community could support. As a unified school district, you could actually increase the tax rate. There's a limit. You can increase the tax rate to $60 per 100,000 of assessed value. Okay? So these numbers are much lower than what you could actually afford, or what the law would allow you to raise. One other thing I want to point out here, you see the different columns. You see 2025, 2027, 2029. When we look at these bond programs for school districts, it's very rare that you sell everything at once. So if we said you could do a bond at a $25 tax rate, it would raise $106 million. Typically, you're going to sell that over 2 to 3, what we call series, 2 to 3 tranches every couple of years. The reason you do that is because it's difficult to spend $100 million or even $60 million. And it's hard to finish those projects. Okay, so we spread that out over time. It also helps spread out that tax liability to the community. These are based on assumptions. We try to use very conservative assumptions here. When we're looking at the assessed value and building these bond programs, we look at what we think the assessed value will do over time. If you recall the prior page, your assessed value historically has grown, I think, as over 5.7, 5.8%. Let me get that number. Yep, 5.8%. Here we're assuming an assessed value growth rate of 3.5%, so well below what you've historically done. If we raise that up to 4%, assuming the assessed value grows over 4% year over year, your district could raise even more money. And we just provide that information. We know, well, at least talking today, you don't need 115 for these projects, but we want to give you parameters so you have an idea of what you can do. Or maybe there's something else jumps in and you're all, well, let's maybe a little bit more. Let's take a pause there and see if there are any questions. Hearing none.
So actually, I do. So so this tax rate per 100,000. So I'll just look at this one, $15 for Series A, 20 million. So this 50. So say that we just decided to do a general obligation bond, and so we were able to get it. So that amount would be added to already the 1997 bond that is already on the property tax, the 2010 and the 2012 as well, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be in addition to the bonds that we've already have.
Correct.
On our books.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll just layer that on.
Yeah. Okay.
And just, this is a little nuance that you may or may not be interested in, but I'm going to share it with anyways. That $60 tax rate limit that I told you earlier is just per election. So even though you have a $40 tax rate in the community already, you could actually do another $60 for this election. Not that we're recommending it, but I just want to, again, give you the idea of what you could do, what the community could support.
I guess I'm a little confused on when you say that the community can support it, what does that mean?
Numbers-wise, not politically, and we'll get to the political part of it later.
Okay.
Not saying what they would decide to do if they'd vote yes or no. What they could support from a financial sense based on the tax base.
But
I see a little more confused.
Yeah, but how is that determined? I mean, who's determining that
Right.
that these folks can afford that our tax?
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Oh, it's just math. It's a mathematical equation. So what we do is we look at what your assessed value is, how big we think it'll grow over time, and at various different tax rates, which are essentially percentages, we apply that percentage to that assessed value growth. And then that says you can repay bonds at $1 million a year, or $5 million a year, or $10 million a year. So that's what I mean by support. So how much can that tax base fund for a bond? How big of a bond can that tax base support or fund?
That's probably given, I mean, if there's multiple bonds on a ballot, then is that impacted? Because in other words, in theory, the community can support this, what you're saying.
Yes.
But if there are 5 bonds on the ballot, can the community still support all 5 bonds?
Good question. And that is part of why I mentioned that $60 tax rate is a limit per bond measure.
Okay.
Because you could put several of those on there. Theoretically, you could put a bunch of them on there, and each one stands on its own, and it's calculated on its own. The tax rate is calculated, and how much of a bond, how big of a bond program it could raise. Okay. Again, I'm going to use the extreme example just to kind of drive this point a little bit. The taxpayers could vote to put they could tax themselves as much as they want. But that's the reason California put this law into place, even starting with Prop 13 back in the 1970s. The legislature wanted to limit the ability of local agencies to raise taxes absent voter support. So the theory is that you could raise your taxes as much as you want, or you could ask the voters to raise their taxes as much as they want. They could pay $1 million a year, but they have to vote for it.
Sure. Okay.
So you have to convince the community that's important.
Right.
And we'll get to some of that a little bit, but that's the political part, the political support versus the financial support.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And so, this is, again, I don't want to get stuck on that support word, but because I want to be very clear so you guys all understand. When I was using support earlier, from a financial sense,
Okay,
how much you could raise.
right.
Financially allowable.
Okay.
Okay, now a little bit of the political part, voter demographics. I have the handout. It's labeled page 9 because I'd printed some out. I will leave this towards the end, unless you want to go through it now.
What, the voter demographics? Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a separate page. It's called page 9 because I brought some printed copies that I inserted this in there.
Okay.
So why don't we look at that since we all have it in front of us? Might as well. Going back to the tax rates. I was just thinking when I was going through some of this analysis, looking at some of these pages, what do other people pay in the county? What do other districts pay in the county, or the residents, the taxpayers, the property owners in the county pay? You see St. Helena at the far right, amongst the lowest of the unified school districts. Napa Valley, Fairfield. Fairfield just has a small portion in this county. But we put it in there for comparative purposes. And then Calistoga, all have higher tax rates. We have the data down below. St. Helena, $40 per 100,000 of assessed value. Napa Valley, 76. Fairfield's Assoon, 64. And then Calistoga, 61. We do include the elementary districts in there because I want to be very clear that the elementary districts, you'll have residents that both live in the elementary districts and the unified districts. So they'll be paying taxes on both of those. So it's a cumulative effect there.
So for the St. Helena, this includes the previous 3 bonds?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so it's adding everything that would show up on line items? Basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And when a taxpayer looks at their property tax bill, I don't know if you've ever looked at it in detail, but you'll see the line items for each of the taxes you pay. Each of the public agencies, the school districts, the community college district. I don't have that on here, but the community college district. So there are additional taxes. But again, that's why Prop 13 and the way schools are funded in California, that's kind of why they're put in places. You have to ask the voters to raise their own taxes, at least for school bonds. Any question on the comparative tax rates page?
I guess and it's not really crucial because we're just really looking at the total dollar amount. But like, for example, looking at Calistoga, I wondered how many bonds does that include for $61?
I cannot tell you off the top of my head. I could look it up very quickly, but I don't want to be sitting on my phone the whole time.
It's the same kind of, and Napa Valley obviously that's not surprising. It's a little bit higher because they're the biggest school district in the county. More buildings, more students, all those kind of things. That's not.
bonds.
And it's just more just for context. If we end up having a more serious discussion about a general obligation bond, of knowing truly what our neighbors have done and to get to these amounts.
I get that. I know, we work with both Calistoga and Fairfield Sassoon. We don't work with Napa. But I can get that. There's also I was going to see if I could pull it up quickly, but again, I'm not going to get distracted.
I looked it up.
Like my kids do.
Calistoga has Measure A and Measure B. One's from 2022 and one's from 2010. A $41 million bond and a $42 million bond.
2022, and what was the other?
2010.
2010.
Measure A was 2010. Measure B was 2022.
Okay.
And they're roughly at the same amount, 42 million and 41 million.
Okay.
There's a website called eddata.org.
Yes.
And you could look up the county, and then you look up the district, and it'll show you, I think it's called revenue measures, or local revenue measures. There's a tab, and you can kind of scroll down, and you can see the prior bonds that the districts have.
I recall that now.
That the districts have passed or failed. You'll see the parcel taxes. You'll see the bonds, pass, fail. You don't see the taxes on that website, but that's something we could get. Or you could also, the county auditor controller has that information. Again, instead of going there, we can get that information for you too.
Thank you.
But Ed Data is a good source for some of that historical information.
Trustees, any questions right now? No? Okay.
And we can always come back if something pops in your head as we go through this. Voter demographics. Like I mentioned, you have to ask the voters. And the voters have to approve a bond at 55% under Prop 39 guidelines that was implemented back in 2000. Primarily Democrat, but 51% Democrats, 22% Republicans, 27% other, and a somewhat older population, 41% at 65 plus. That doesn't mean that the older population, they'll have to pay the taxes. Sometimes people will think, well, they won't support it because they don't have kids in school, but sometimes they still have that connection to the school. They may have grandkids. They may have gone to the schools, or they have grown adult kids who've gone to the schools. So just because you have an older demographic doesn't mean it makes it that much more difficult to pass a bond. You just have to, you just have to know about that and convince them that it's important. Better educated workforce, better educated kids, safer streets, those type of things. I like to tell the story. I live in Walnut Creek, not too far from here, and we have Rossmore, which is a retirement community, and it's about 10 to 15,000 people that live there. And the population of Walnut Creek is probably about 35, so it's a big chunk of Walnut Creek. The voting population is about 35,000, but so they're a big chunk of the voting population. And they actually supported the local school bond at a higher rate, at a higher percentage than the general population. But it's because we went to them, and I live there, so I went out to Rossmore and just did presentation. So this is what, in fact, they volunteered more than anyone else. They were out at the farmer's market telling people, vote yes, vote yes. So again, it's just information, and then we got to decide how to use it. Questions on that?
How does folks who don't actually live here but own homes, like second homes, third homes, how does that impact the vote?
Wherever they're registered to vote.
Okay. So they don't really play into it unless they're registered here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a big chunk of our population now.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that, but it's climbing for sure. So that is a factor to definitely consider. Okay, because a lot of those people have some of the highest assessed properties, but aren't registered voters here.
Vacation homes, second homes.
Yeah.
And then voter turnout. This is something that we look at very closely, and it typically holds that the higher the voter turnout, the higher passing rate for school district bonds. You generally just get not the high propensity, we call it high propensity voters. The high propensity voters will come out at any election, but everyone and their mother comes out at the big elections, and it's primarily those presidential elections. This one we expect to be very large because it's Trump-Biden. So a lot of people are going to be turning out, and again, that gets some of the more left-leaning, school bond-friendly voters out. And then what are the next steps? What does it mean to do a bond from this point forward if you were looking or considering a November election? We have here some of the main steps. Today's discussion, May 29th, discuss exploring the possibility of a bond. Then board approval. So exploring the possibility of bond means putting out a survey to potential voters. So what we do is we get a third-party survey firm that makes the phone calls. They have people's cell phones now because very few hard lines. They do research on who the typical voters are. You can get all the data. You can get historical data of each and every voter in the county, and when they voted, what they voted, support school bonds, this, that, who they are, male, female, older, younger. That's how we populated some of those prior graphs. And we see who are the typical voters, and we do a survey on that. The reason we like to do the surveys is because, everyone's going to have an opinion. You guys will have an opinion. Your neighbors will have an opinion. But unless you get outside of that bubble of opinion, and actually talk to people who typically vote, you're not going to really know where the vote's going to sway. Because I may have a bunch of friends that hate taxes, and so they're chirping in my ear, Jeff, why are you working on a school bond for Walnut Creek School District? What are you doing? You're going to raise our taxes. If I heard that all day, I would think no one's going to vote for it. But we did the survey, and it showed there was strong support for a bond, because you're talking to everyone, not just a few small groups of people. So that's doing the survey. In June, we'd come back and give you the results of the survey. Is there community support, or is there not? The key deadline is early August. And this says, I think my glasses, I got to get redone. This says August 8th. It's actually August 6th. It's a couple days earlier in Napa County. They have a August 6th deadline to submit a measure for the ballot in November. So the school district, the board, would need to approve a resolution to get on the November ballot by early August to submit to the county by August 6th.
So my question is, how detailed is this? If we were trying to prepare a bond, does it, and obviously improvements here, how much do you give voters to try and pass this? Do you explain this is happening, or is it just lumped as capital improvements? I mean, what do you put out there?
Good question. There's a couple steps and a couple answers to that. So there's the legal part of it, and then there's the campaign part of it. Now I can tell you, before the district or board decides to approve a bond or not, before that resolution date, you can put out information to the public, but it can't be, we need facilities, they're great. They can't be, we don't need facilities, they're terrible. You just have to put just the facts. After you approve that, or if you approve a resolution to do a bond, it becomes campaigning. And with the campaigning, as you can imagine, you're trying to convince people to vote yes, so you're giving out information. These are the great projects we're doing. And on those campaigns, you typically highlight the projects that voters will support. Part of that survey is asking people about their willingness to support a bond with various different projects. So the campaigning, you're focusing on the projects that people will support. There's another layer of it. Actually, let me stop at that higher layer. When people go to vote, there's a 75-word ballot statement, and that's what people will see and they'll read. And that one has a few key legal things you need to put there about the cost of the bond, but it's also an opportunity to put a few projects in there. Health and safety projects, technology, modernization, leaky roofs. But that ballot statement is only limited to 75 words. So besides the legal stuff that you have to put in there, which is about half those words, you only have a few words in there where you can talk about the project. So you don't put a lot of detail. Going back another level, or maybe going forward another level, but at another level, when the board actually approves a resolution, that will have a very, very detailed project list. Okay? And it'll be very detailed and very broad. So you'll put a lot of projects in there, even projects that may be lower priority, maybe projects that aren't on this list, but you thought, if we had extra money, I'd love to do this. Because when you put that project, the resolution that the board approves is kind of the guiding document for the projects. You have to have approved it in the resolution to spend bond dollars on it. That's why it's very broad. That's why it has a lot of detail. That's why it has a lot of projects. But it could have projects that total $200 million. But let's say you're doing a $100 million bond. That's where you prioritize. So stepping back to your question, how much do you tell people? What do you put out there? You got the different layers. Most people are only going to see the 75-word ballot statement and the campaign information. They may go on a district website for the factual information. But everything is available. That resolution will be passed. In the ballot, when people get their mail-in ballots, there'll be more information about the projects. But I can tell you, just from experience and knowing, not a lot of people look at that level of detail. But it is out there, it is publicly available, and people can read it and ask about those projects or look at those projects.
Is there any financial assessed, is that included in the description as well, of like saying if the resolution was saying we're going to go with the $15 assessed, does that get included as well?
Yes, and that's part of the required legal language in the 75-word ballot statement.
Okay.
You have to have the tax rate.
Okay.
So that $30 or $25 or $20 per 100,000 of assessed value.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the amount it raises annually, and it's just an average, but let's say it raises, at that tax rate you can raise $5 million annually. Then you say you have to have the total amount of the bond. So that $5 million annually will go to pay back bonds totaling $100 million. And I'm just kind of throwing out numbers, making up numbers, but so you have that total bond amount, how much it'll cost every year at a dollar amount, and how much it'll cost every year at a tax rate. There's also what is put in the ballot, a tax rate statement. That's a little longer document, a one-page document that voters will maybe see. I know I look at mine, maybe not a lot of people do. But that has a little bit more. That actually shows the total cost, the total repayment cost. So when you repay a bond, you pay back the principal and the interest just like a mortgage. So you're not just paying back $100 million, you maybe pay back $150 or $200 million.
Okay.
And that cost will be in there. So they are definitely there for people to see.
Okay, great. Thank you. Questions? No?
So then I'm assuming we as a district would hire a PR firm or a marketing consultant that would run a campaign. Is that generally how it's done?
He's shaking his head. I want to hear your answer first, then I'll give mine.
My understanding, and you can certainly come back here, is up until you guys decide to move forward with the bond, you can say, anything you'd like. But once you get to the point where you move forward, you need to remove yourself from the campaigning efforts, and somebody typically will come in outside of that to lead the campaign. And please correct me if I'm wrong. You can continue forward dispensing information. Mm-hmm. Right? But you can't say yes or no. You can't bring yourselves into the yes or no process, but you could say to Kay, if you'd like, have a town hall where we talk about our deferred maintenance list. And as long as that's housed under a need to put information forward and doesn't conclude with a yes or no, you can continue to put out information, but campaigning needs to be done outside of the school and the entity itself.
So that's kind of what I was asking. You would hire a firm that would decide what color posters you're going to have and do all that, because that's an expense we would take on, hiring someone to run this campaign.
I don't believe the district can do that. In the districts that we've worked in before, frequently other members of the community lead those campaigning efforts outside of the district itself.
You mind if I jump in now?
Yeah, please.
Okay. As a school board, you cannot campaign. You can only provide, as representatives of the school, not just school board, superintendent, CBO, everyone. You cannot campaign. You can just provide factual information. Not even like we need new roofs because they're going to collapse or something.
So that's kind of what I was asking.
So
you have to hire someone. That would be an expense. We hire someone to run this campaign.
Not necessarily. And I'm just going to jump in because I was involved in the two campaigns that we had for this district prior to my involvement on the board. And so I was a community member who volunteered my time to go knock on doors and talk to people about Measure B and Measure C and why it was needed, and could I get their signature or support, answer questions. But it had nothing to do with the school. It was basically an offshoot of, I think, of people that were on the business operations committee who were passionate about that. Parent group did recruitment, things like that. And then there were just community members who were like, we need a new pool. We need a performing arts building. And that's how the kind of the grassroots effort happened. And to me, it needs to be grassroots, because much of what we are experiencing in our community right now, when a stranger knocks on your door trying to get you to sign on something and can't pronounce the name of the town correctly, it doesn't put a lot of validity into what they're trying to ask you to do. And I'll stop there.
You know, but
No, sorry. I was just going to say sharing your experience is great because you've been there. I can.
yeah, and I have as well.
Okay.
So, however, for the a Measure B and Measure C, we were actually, our district, it was for kind of the sexy things, kind of the needed things that we wanted, like the aquatic center, CTE buildings, performing arts center, tennis course, baseball, softball field, etc. So sixth grade quad, a new sixth grade. So those are some people so people could really be like, oh yeah, that would be great because the community can use it. This is great. This is great. But then with this one, it would be kind of like, we need to go out because we need to destroy our portables and repair our windows and roof and gutters and deferred maintenance. And so it doesn't feel that great anymore. It kind of feels to me, if I was to hear this, I would be like going, well, what are you doing with all your money during these last 10 years? Why haven't you been able to pay for this already? With the money that you make, because you're a high wealth district, why don't you have the money to do this? So that's just my own opinion on that.
Yeah. I mean, we hear that argument. We pay the state plenty of taxes. You know, I've even heard we contribute to the PTA, or we give money to the boosters or whatever. What I would say is,
and so my point was, it might have been easier the last couple ones than it could be this time, just because of the needs were different. The needs were buildings, like actual buildings, where the community could use. And now that's not going to be the case this
I would
time.
say infrastructure projects don't always kill a measure. In fact, they can sometimes benefit a measure. People don't always like the sexy projects. They don't want, the gold-plated windows and the nice fancy pool. They want to make sure their kids are in safe environments where the kids can learn, and also where the kids can be proud of their school. Having newer facilities, nicer facilities, and not just the kids, the teachers, faculty, staff, a place to be proud of. As far as the funding, I'm even going to step back. Today's discussion, or where we are like in this schedule here, is just going and asking about exploring the possibility, which in layman's terms means doing a survey. The survey will tell you, and it's pretty statistically accurate, the survey will tell you within a margin of error whether the community supports a bond. In fact, the way that we design these surveys, we just ask in general, does the community support the school? Does it think the school's doing a good job? Does it think the board's doing a good job? Does it think the teachers are doing a good job? So it gets a general idea of what the community thinks about the schools. Then they start asking about projects. Would you support a bond that would fund technology? Would you support a bond that funds, a pool? Would you support a bond that does safety and security? That's a big one these days. Then the survey also asks, would you support a bond if you knew it cost you $30, a $30 tax rate? Would you support a bond if it was a $20 tax rate or a $10 tax rate? And you compile all this information and you see where people's sensitivities are, what they support, and this support in the political sense. Will they support a bond that funds infrastructure but not a pool, or vice versa? Will they support a bond that funds technology, or they think, no, we've done a good job? Will they also, knowing that it's going to cost them money, will you still vote yes for a bond? Knowing that you're going to have to pay taxes, will you still vote yes for a bond? So the survey is designed to ask all these different questions and then gauge whether people would vote yes or no. And we compile all this information. It's usually a week-long survey process. You get 400 to 500 respondents, maybe around 400. Seems like a small number, but that actually gives you enough to be statistically significant, to actually have meaningful data. If you usually get about 400 for a tax base, or not tax base, but a voter base of this size. That usually gives you enough information within a small margin of error or a reasonable margin of error to know where people's, yes or no lie. So it's doing the survey. Then you have the information. Now for school bonds passage, you need 55% to pass. So if it comes back and it's like in the 70s, you should feel pretty good about yourself that you're, one, doing a good job, and two, the community recognizes it, and then also that they recognize the need. If you're in the 50s, then it's a little harder. If you're in the mid 50s, right at that 55, 56, 57%, you got to decide, well, do we still move forward? And just because you're close to that 55% threshold, even if you're at 54%, doesn't mean you knock it off the table or you just say no. But it's probably a little longer conversation. But then with that information, then you could think a little bit more, well, do I want to do a bond or not?
And so on that note, with the surveys are conducted, and then how much, and I may be getting ahead of myself, but how much time by personnel is spent on really digging into what's happening locally with other factors going on and other contentious issues in the community? And I may be getting ahead of myself here, but I'm just knowing this community that I think that we do is, we have, all you got to do is spend a little time on nextdoor.com and realize how upset everybody about the amount of money they pay for water, for PG&E, for everything up here. So this is what I'm saying, like how much research is done to really understanding the dynamics that voters are facing here.
Well, let me put it this way, and I don't discredit that because I've again seen the next doors both professionally and personally, all the above. In fact, my wife teaches at our local district, so I hear what the teachers think as well. But the survey actually gets rid of some of that noise because the people on Nextdoor are the ones that, it's the loud voices who have complaints that go on Nextdoor. You get more of those people than the positive stuff,
right,
or the helpful stuff. In my opinion, in my experience and what I've seen. It's also the reason why, I could talk to all my friends and all my PTA members and they could say, bonds, terrible idea, Jeff, what are you doing? But until you do that survey, you don't actually know what the larger community thinks. You don't know what the 65-year-olds over in Rossmore, in Walnut Creek, in my example, are actually feeling. They're not on Nextdoor. Yeah. You don't actually hear their voices. So it gets rid of some of the noise and actually boils it down to something that is much more scientific than some of that stuff. Now, having said that, you would still want to address some of those things if you could, if you thought they were reasonable concerns. During the campaign part of it, if you decided to move forward, you can reach out. That's part of the campaigning. That's part of getting out the promotional material and letting people know, really, this is what we're going to do. Or if they're complaining that, what have you done with the money the past, 10 years, 12 years? You show them, this is what we did. You can't see it, but we replaced the wire and we replaced plumbing. We replaced carpet. We made the rooms nicer.
Is this something that would go to the Monrovia meeting? I guess I'm trying to figure out how we connect with other city areas on this. I don't know what.
It really wouldn't be our job to do that. Okay. To be quite honest, we as a board would vote to support a resolution according to this timeline to go forward. That is that role, I see that, Sean, as a role that it comes up in conversations with community partners when Dr. Vang might be at something, when the superintendent is at something, and the conversation kind of naturally, but to that point, you do have to be very diligent about not campaigning or slanting an argument one way or another as a board member. So, did I answer that correctly?
Yeah, I was going to add just looking at the other perspective. Board members have the right of freedom of speech. So, as an individual, if you live in the community, you can campaign. However, with your board member hat on, it's just the facts. Stick to the facts. And it's honestly it's tough to balance that, but that's the rule.
that seems very tough to balance that. To be
Yeah,
quite
definitely,
honest.
but-
in a small community where everybody's known as well, you know.
Yeah.
So realistically, this is kind of improbable. I'm just thinking if this is June, we have no July board meeting, and this has to go to August 6th to the county, where's our timeline here? I don't feel like we have a timeline to try and get something on this year's ballot, or am I getting my dates wrong here?
No, you're not getting your dates wrong. I think if you look at what's being proposed, I mean, perhaps we're exploring today, but if so directed, I think we could direct staff to proceed with the survey. Am I correct on that?
That would be what we would need, a survey.
So that we would give direction today to say, well, we authorize a survey to be conducted to see if this general obligation has legs to go forward for November.
Because that
But if we
timeline
do-
shows the June 13th board meeting. If we get direction for a survey, we would be bringing the results on the 13th. So it's a really quick turnaround. You will know by the 13th should we move forward.
Oh, we
or
would do it
not.
in the next 2-week timeline
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
Ah, I see. I thought we had to wait till the board meeting
No,
to.
because that will
guess this
determine
is a board
then
meeting.
if the board wants to try to get a board meeting in before the August 6th deadline
Yeah.
to get a resolution. So really, the survey in the next 2 weeks by the June 13th is sort of your trigger.
Yeah. Do we know how much a survey costs the district?
Like, how much is it going to cost us?
It's going to be, I believe, under 10,000. I'd say 8 to 10,000.
Okay.
I would have to double check that, but I think that's about what it would be.
Well, I think that the city has their transfer tax on the ballot as well. The transfer tax is going to be on the ballot.
Yeah, and then there's also potentially if the other thing that's going to be, it could go to the ballot if the city council or if that hotel project
Oh, the Charles Crew.
does, if it has the signatures, or I forget what the language is, but there's something that they can just decide to go forward with it, or they could decide to put it on the ballot as well. And I don't know where that's tracking, to be honest, so.
I think the most recent thing I read today was that it's going to be on the ballot.
Okay. All right.
I saw something come across the Register or Star.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be quite candid and say that I'm one of those people that feels like I need to be convinced. I'll be honest. That's not to say that I'm not
Oh, yeah,
open to
100%.
conversation or any of that. That's not at all
Understood.
to say that. I am very cautious and given what's kind of out in our community right now and some of the other angst that's being expressed about all these other projects and whatnot, you know, I don't know. I just don't know what kind of legs it's going to have. I mean, and I suppose really to know, the only way to know what kind of legs it's going to have is to do the survey. So then the question comes down, do we support a survey not to exceed $10,000 kind of thing to see whether or not, because I guess then, and I'm sorry, I know but if there is no survey and the bond matter becomes a dropped issue, really, we don't have any other way to pay for our projects. Is that what I'm understanding? Yes? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
However, we don't have to be paying our $81 million like in the next 3 years. I would rather see kind of a list. I would like to prioritize our list first and see how we can kind of start chopping away at some of the projects that we have and start tightening our belts here at the district in order to pay for some of these projects.
And I think that's what, looking at this matrix, I think that was the one thing that I know that it's sorted by site and what, but I truly wasn't clear on like what is a priority. I mean, Warm Safe Drive we know is priority. We know that that's important to everybody. But I didn't know, and I apologize. I see where it says yes, you know, that Warm Safe Drive. But does that mean that's at the top of the list? That means those are items 1 through 15 that are going to be our first go-to.
So the way we presented the matrix, is sorted by site, but we can go over to that column and sort by score, and that will
Okay.
then redo the list of your top scored projects.
Okay. I think, Trent, I think that would be helpful.
Sure,
So
absolutely.
for, I know you guys live and breathe this,
Yeah, absolutely.
and probably could memorize it in your sleep. But I think, and I'm not assuming this for everybody, so I don't mean to offend anybody, but I think if we were to look at this list to say 1 through 15, this is what we want to hit the ground running, and we have this amount of state funding to help for this, and this is what the district needs to come up with. I don't mean to simplify it, but does that make sense
Yeah.
to everybody? Just to say, like, so if we're looking at that point, $17 million, that's the district expense for the first 1 through 15, then I think it's going to help us. I don't know.
We work at we work any way you'd like us to work. We'll get you that information, and then that's why we built the database the way we did.
Okay.
If you come to me and say, I want to know the top 15 projects, we can do that for you. We can have it for you tomorrow. If you want to know the top 25%, we can do it that way. I can give you the top at each campus. However you want to do that, we can give you all that information. And I think that's really kind of what it comes back to the survey too. When you talk about, really just having the information at your hands to make those informed decisions, that's what's going to be really critical to see. Will your community say, we're not going to pass this without this marquee project? Or no, is it fiscally responsible that we just focus on making sure our deferred maintenance works? Sometimes we see those type of bonds polling higher than we do the ones with the big marquee projects. You won't know that in your community until you do that survey and really understand this is what our community will or will not support. This is who in our community will or will not support it. But then you can start to make those informed decisions. And if it's for us to come along and say, hey, give us our top 10 projects, just so we can kind of wrap our heads around that, we can have that for you by tomorrow afternoon.
I personally would love that
Yeah.
because it would help me say, like, okay, and just because I do know where Jeannie's mindset is coming from, and it's nice to hear that the opposite of you're saying, like, infrastructure can be sexy. That is great to hear because I do think it's gonna.
Yeah.
I just envisioning, like, I'm gonna go and if I was the person going and knocking on doors, well, you can't wait to see this basement drainage and ventilation. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be
No,
like,
it's
I'm not
absolutely
trying to be
true.
flippant. I am concerned about the buy-in on these things. Absolutely, these things are needed. We know that. I'm just.
And I think that a lot of that comes down to how you talk about it.
I know.
Right? What we're going to
That's what
say
I was
is,
going to say. Yeah.
we're not going to go sell the basement, but we're going to talk about fiscal responsibility. We're going to talk about meeting the needs of our students in a way that is held accountable to community taxpayers. We're not going to spend these dollars on sort of the gilded palaces. We are going to make sure that our students, where they touch these buildings, how they touch these buildings, are done in a way that it meets the standards of our community. And we're going to ask just for those dollars. Can you help us with that?
Well stated.
And so we can really look at doing that, and how we kind of spin that is really the idea. Because I think that we can kind of look back at how your survey works specifically, but the things that we see or I see trending across the state, STEAM, very, very high. Fiscal responsibility for the deferred maintenance, very high as well. Like those are kind of the two. Unless you have a community that is driven by a particular event, you're really going to want to come back to we are being as fiscally responsible as possible. We do an information campaign. This is how we fund our projects. This is the work we've done to say that these projects are needed. And we can put that all out as information, and we've done this all over the place. I've been to Sunrise Rotaries talking about this is the information list. You can talk about that as long as you don't say yes or no. You say, this is the work the district has done to generate this list. This is the value of that list. This is how we fund these projects. Thank you very much.
And you mentioned that there might be some competing taxes or taxes that your community might feel are competing on the same ballot. But it's important to recognize, acknowledge, and underline the fact that schools are infrastructure for your community just as much as your roads are, those transit taxes, that kind of thing. Your schools are also infrastructure. And it's important in the state's eyes that the district, comes up with that local funding. And that's why it's part of, they require that match, is because the state's going to put in some money, and it's important for the community also to kick in the money to underline that fact that it is an important part of the infrastructure of your community.
So, to share, I would not approve a 10,000 today because I feel unprepared knowing the stack rank and what dollar amount spread out across multiple years, because I don't know what I'd be asking for, I guess. But it sounds like the data's there. I just don't have it today to vote on.
Can I
that's my
give you a little information because I did some moving around? We have 13 projects with the highest ranked score. They're all 60 points. There's 13 of them. Grand total project budget would be $21.9 million for those top 13 projects based on ranking.
Can I add a quick thing too? For the survey, well, keep in mind a survey is going to be 10 to 12 minutes. You're not going to go longer than that because you'd lose people. They just hang up on you. So the surveys, while they ask all these questions that I mentioned, have to be somewhat broad in nature. So you don't need to know today specific projects, detailed projects. You would say things like safety and security, STEAM, general broad terms that were Trent mentioned earlier, because that's all you have time to get into. You'll get a range of projects, maybe a half a dozen, maybe a dozen projects in that 10 to 12 minutes, and you'll get maybe a couple questions about the tax rate. Doesn't mean you have to decide an exact tax rate, but we need to know general parameters of where people, where their sensitivities are. Are they sensitive to the tax rate? There may be people that, or you may see 70% approval no matter what the tax rate is. It's unlikely, but you may. But we got to have general ideas, but we can't get into those specifics. So you don't need to. When the surveys are designed, and we do hundreds of these, when the surveys are designed, they do have to be somewhat broad in nature. And in fact, you compare surveys over surveys across districts throughout the state, you'd see a lot of similarities because, again, the constraints of just having people's attention for a few minutes and being able to get a few questions out. But then you bring that information back, and as a board, you have a more detailed discussion of, okay, does this inform the way we campaign? Does this inform, what we approve as a resolution? Does this reprioritize certain items? Looking at the tax rate, well, is the community sensitive to tax rate? Okay, well, then we'll do a lower tax rate. We can't fund everything, but that gets us there. That gets us most of the way there. But the survey gives you some information, but it doesn't mean you have to make a decision today. You're not prioritizing projects today or tax rate or anything.
We're basically paying to get our finger on the pulse of the community.
Correct.
What we're thinking about today. Okay. Any further? Go ahead, please.
No, I agree having the priorities because I'd like us to be able to see, is there any money we can spend before we go to the community? Do we have $10,000 that could fix the sidewalk in front of such and such building so nobody trips? I mean, I do think they're all great priority. I mean, having things painted would be nice, but is somebody going to break their leg if they fall? I feel like it'd be nice if we could show the front that these are our priorities. We're going to take money. We have money at the school. We're going to do this. And then, I don't know. I feel like the community's like, well, why are you asking us to pay for everything? I just have this, like, are we showing we're trying to make an effort as a district?
During the campaign process, one thing that really resonates, and again, I don't want to discount any of these questions or concerns. They're all very valid. We see them across the state, but this is what we found. And going back to that mention of fiscal responsibility and just being smart with your money, I mean, keep in mind to get some of these state funds, you have to have local matching dollars. And realistically, for most districts, the only way to get there is to do a bond. It's hard to have that much cash on hand. So back to what I was saying, the campaign, you put that in the campaign. And it's true. You're not trying to blow smoke. It's true that by approving this bond, you're not doing $80 million, let's call it an $80 million bond, or let's call it a $40 million bond, whatever. You're not doing $40 million of projects. You're doing 40 plus the 40 from the state or whatever the state is giving you.
Sure.
So it allows you to open up the world of possibility.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yes, that's true, but we don't know that for a fact.
Correct.
As far as the state, what kind of money we're going to get from the state? Because it.
Well, that may not pass.
Yeah.
As well. So we're living in a little bit of the realm of the unknowns, and we're being asked to somewhat take a chance, is what we're being asked upon, to a degree. Any commentaries over? Okay.
I was just going to say, to your point, Trustee, look at, well, what funding do we have, or what monies do we have available to spend right now on these projects before we ask the community? The reality of it is there really are not a lot of sources of revenue that you can spend on your facilities. Unfortunately, there used to be programs from the state where you would get funding for deferred maintenance and things like that. Those are not in place anymore. So it really comes back to that three-legged stool. You have your developer fees, you have your local dollars, which would be your general obligation, bonds, your parcel taxes, that kind of thing. And then you have those state or federal programs. Those are really the main three sources of funding for your facilities. Outside of that, it's very sparse.
I just wanted to kind of touch back on something Trustee Pelosi just said, where you're saying we're in a little bit of the unknown, right? And we've been working very actively for the last 6 months to kind of shine the light into as much of the unknown as we can. And really the surveys are sort of the next step of that, right? Because that's going to shine the light into your community. We've shined the light into the list of projects. We've worked hard to prioritize them, and thank you for doing that quick prioritization there. Even your top priorities is right around $21 million. The next portion of kind of beginning to understand the unknown would just be sort of shining the light into the community and looking to get some quantifiable survey results to continue along this line of that we've been walking, right? We want quantifiable results so we can make the best and most informed decisions as we can. This is sort of the next step of finding the quantifiable assessment of your community to tie next to what we've done locally or in the district through the last couple months.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
To me, it doesn't feel very good because it's so rushed right now. It feels like we're like, oh my gosh, we're scrambling and we've got to do a bond because we don't have any money. That's what it feels like to me right now. And I don't want our community to feel that way of our district.
That we're rushing.
That we're rushing. That all of a sudden, oh my gosh, they just found out they have, all these facility needs and now they need money and now they're coming to us.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be those people that will think that, but in some reality, I mean, and people don't pay attention like we're paying attention because it's our job to be.
Yeah.
But this has been in the works for a while. I mean, it's not like.
Well, I know, I realize that, but it doesn't. But it doesn't feel like that in the community.
No, it probably doesn't. I agree with you. But it's.
Yeah.
I mean, I just feel that as much as I don't like the idea of doing a survey, I know there's nothing on this project list for $8,000 to $10,000 that we're going to get done. So there's nothing on that covers that. And so maybe, just hear me out for a second. If we move forward with the survey, it either is going to then make this issue dead in the water because we don't have the support for it, and we are going to have to move along at the pace that we can afford to and at whatever we can to take care of our facilities. And and I don't, when I say limp along, I'm not trying to put a negative spin on it. I'm just saying, but that's just, it's going to be a slower, smaller process. And then if we then find that it has momentum and there would be support for it, then we know that we're not just like shooting fish in a barrel kind of thing, because it's like, okay, well, they're interested in hearing more, and then we still have to decide and vote as a board if we want it on the ballot. I mean, that still eventually comes back to us, even if the community, you were saying if it's in the 50s, it's not necessarily.
It's a tougher decision.
Yes,
it's
a tougher decision.
It's not a dead in the water. 55% is the threshold.
Right.
And I apologize. I think I misspoke earlier. For the state school bond, it's 50%.
Okay.
Local school bonds, 55%.
55.
Yeah, not dead in the water. You just, it's probably just a tougher decision.
Right.
If it's in the 70s, it's probably an easier decision. But maybe it's still tough. Maybe you still have these concerns. There's still, again, very important things to discuss.
I mean, I'm with these guys. I am concerned too. There's no make no mistake. That is a concern of mine. But I also will share something that is in my mindset, much like when the whole petition was going around to sign for the hotel. I felt, even though I have my personal feelings one way or another against that project, I felt it was important that the voters had an opportunity to weigh in on it. That, however I felt, so that, for example, is why I signed the petition so that it could at least go to the voters and let the voters decide what they want. Do they want this development? Do they not? So I'm only arguing that for the same, that kind of applies here. That we're just saying, if the voters would be like, those people are crazy, then there's no way
You'll
we're
know.
going to agree to another additional taxes on our property tax statement. I mean, they may hear that. We don't know. So I'm playing devil's advocate on the other side of that. That's all I'm trying to say.
I'd like to just another piece of information to add. The next chance after November 2024, the next chance for a local school bond would be June of 2026. You can only do them every the even years, the big elections, primaries, presidentials, gubernatorials.
Okay. So June of 20 would be the next opportunity. Okay.
Yeah, I think 2026 is a June primary,
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. So, trustees, at this point, and you just have to kind of let me know if you're not ready to make a decision today because you want to see this list. That's certainly your prerogative to do so. But if somebody wants to make a motion to proceed with a survey not to exceed $10,000, that can also be done today. It does need a second, and it needs a majority vote to do so. And that's pretty much where our options, I believe. Correct? Do I have that correct, everybody? Okay. And please, and obviously, take a few moments if there's something else you want to share.
I would just say I'm kind of torn because I just feel like we are struggling so much with money, and then we just $10,000 here, $10,000 there. That's really hard for me. To me, that's a lot of money. I don't live in a lifestyle where I can spend $10,000 easily, but I mean, I could spend it easily. I don't have it. I think it's hard just because I don't think there's a good climate in our community right now. I think the RLS track has not been really helped in our favor. There's a lot of negative spending all this money. Are they building an Olympic size? I mean, there's been a lot, and I don't know. I feel really rushed. Maybe to look at I don't think I'm ready personally to approve it. I probably would vote no if you asked me tonight. So maybe a couple days or look at the list. That's just my honest thought right now.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments?
I feel similar in the sense that and I know it's just a survey that we're asking for tonight. I understand that. But it's, I don't know, we do hear a lot about our district right now, and sometimes it's not very good. So I just don't know how it's going to go. I just don't know how a survey is going to go for our school district at this point.
Trustee Moore, anything to add?
I get the whole point is to find out if what we think we feel about the community is accurate, but I then also worry about being like, they're coming for money too, like that reaction, because I don't feel like I can say, yeah, here's our plan over the next 5 years to fund these 6 or 13 projects for 21 or basically 22 million. And when we've laid out the plan, we can contribute $5 million with our reserves every year, and here's where we're short. I guess that's where I feel uncomfortable, but I do get the point that's like, well, get the data. It's not just my opinion. So I'm really, really, really torn right now on this.
What if we were to be able to look at the data and then maybe, I know next week is crazy busy with all the things, but try and find an hour to reconvene at the beginning of the week and
Well, we already have a June 3rd
Monday, yeah.
closed session at 5 o'clock.
Oh, could we add that to it? Quick.
Well,
We
I
wouldn't
don't
get
know.
the survey results back before the next board meeting, though.
Well,
right?
no. I mean,
Is that what you're saying?
well, that's the other issue. If we have to make a decision about this survey,
But
from
this
the sounds of
is
it, they would hit the ground running tomorrow, potentially with the survey, because the results have to be back to us at the June 13th meeting. And I mean, in the fairness of time and effort, if we conduct this conversation and make a decision on June 3rd, and again, I'm not trying to rush you, I'm just outlining what's happening here. Then June 4th is when we would give direction on what needs to happen, and then we're asking them to conduct something within like 7 to.
Could we ask maybe some more questions? How long does it take to conduct a survey?
It's usually about a week. You need, I call it 4 to 5 solid days. But you also need to get on the schedule. We need to make sure they have capacity to take us in. One thing I want to throw out there, and don't throw things at me if you feel strongly about this, but you could always do a special board meeting.
No, we're well familiar with special board meetings. So
It's mostly just the timing before Monday, essentially, if we
it
need
is
to
the
trigger.
timing, and and we have a lot of special things coming up. So totally know that that's an option to us, and we are unfortunately short a trustee this evening for very valid reasons, but we are one voice less tonight.
Friday?
Um,
Would Friday be?
yeah, I mean, well,
What's exactly what are you
but you have
thinking?
to have
What are you?
72 hours notice to
Yeah.
post, and that's not Friday. We're at Wednesday.
For a special, you can do 24.
Oh, 24, sorry. It is 24 for special. So, I mean, that is tomorrow.
Trustee Wolf, what kind of information were you thinking about as far as that?
I was thinking if we were able to look at the projects, is it possible that we could meet briefly Friday and decide, would we all feel like give us a day, 24 hours, we'd be able to make a decision if we want to do a survey? Or is that?
So for me, I would want to more closely look at our budget to be able to meet projects and knowing how many projects we can do at the same time. I don't think we could even do 13 at the same time. So I guess even though we have 13 for 20 million, can we do 4 a year? And what's the cost of those 4? Analyze it against our budget projections before I'd feel comfortable even saying going for a bond. So I would be in favor of meeting again, but I don't know if that data is that quick to go over with us either. So,
and I think just for district staff's purpose, like speaking for myself, until I looked at the agenda, I didn't know we were going to be reviewing a general obligation bond funding source. I didn't know that was coming to us at this facilities workshop. I thought it was more about the prioritization of so I was a little bit taken aback by that.
I agree.
And I figured it was exploration and information today. That's what I felt was happening. But I was a little bit taken aback that a decision was going to be asked of us today, not when we haven't had a lot of 2-on-2s, 1-on-1s, talking more recently about a general obligation bond coming to us. We knew that was a potential funding source, and nobody's saying that wasn't, but we just, like, this was just a lot. This was a lot to get today, and that's maybe why people are feeling uncomfortable having to say, like, okay, well, I'm just kind of soaking this up, and
Because it just feels, for me, it's kind of, I need some time to think about this. I mean, and you're right. I didn't even know that this was on the agenda until I opened up the agenda today, because it wasn't on there yesterday. I don't think the presentation,
yeah,
the GO. I mean, I don't really know, but I did not see it, and I did not know that we were going to be discussing this today.
So I think, so what I'm sensing, and I appreciate you quickly putting that list together, but I do think that the list should be sorted, if at all possible, and I'm not hearing that we have the support. I mean, I'm not hearing that I have a majority vote to or a motion. Does anybody want to make a motion to proceed with the survey not to exceed $10,000? Let's start right there.
So can I just add something?
Absolutely.
I've been listening, and As you all know, this is my first year. I'm new here, and one of the things that I've been doing as you know, my first year here is coming in and really addressing our facilities needs the best that I can, working with Greystone, and as you all know, we've had some transitions with internal staff. One of the things that I've been working diligently on is just addressing those day-to-day facilities needs. For example, in Trent, John can probably, you know, speak to this too, is, for example, just in the last 2 months, we've had, because our infrastructure is older, we're running into some issues that we're dealing with. For example, we had the gas leak at the elementary school, then we had the water pipe, the water leak, and we had 2 other water leaks just within this week alone. And so we're working on getting some isolation valves in place so that when we do have water leaks and we have to turn off the water, we're not turning off the water to the entire campus. We're only turning off, you know, portions of the buildings, correct? So these are all things that on a day-to-day basis, for example, it's costing the district money, and these are things that come up that we don't anticipate, correct? But we have to deal with it. One of the things that April had shared is that we used to get funding for our school facilities, and we no longer get that. When you see me do my board presentations for whether it's first interim, second interim, the budget for next year, one of the things I always list up there are the contributions to those restricted programs, such as routine maintenance, right? Because at one point in time, the state gave us money for that, and we no longer get money for that. And that cost is going up every year. I think our superintendent, Assistant Sue, can also speak to the fact that since I've been here, I've been very tight about our funding and just really honing in on what are our needs, not what do we want, but really what are our needs and facilities. And I think that I know for a fact that if you were to speak with our maintenance team, they will attest to the fact that since I've been here, I've been dealing with our facilities like I'm not just kicking the can down the road, hoping that at some point in time, that is going to somehow fix itself, right? Because it's not going to. And my fear, my challenge, my fear as your CBO is that as I'm looking at this, and Trent has provided this, material pricing guide, and he has stated that this includes, there's the higher labor costs, there's the install costs. Next to hospital, schools are held to the second highest standard, right? So what I fear as your CBO is that as we continue to push some of these deferred maintenance projects down the line, my fear is that it's only going to cost us more down the line. My fear is that things are going to the emergencies are going to happen more often over at the elementary school. No, at RLS, for example, our water pipes are so old to the point where when we had the leak, what we found out was the galvanized pipes from where the leak happened all the way to where the water meter is, we are most likely going to have to replace that, because if we don't, we're going to end up with more emergencies. And so what I'm trying to say and explain is I want to be proactive. I want to be proactive because I don't think you want to see me keep coming to you with here's another proposal. I want to be proactive, and I feel like it's challenging to be proactive because there's only so much general funding that I can really rely on to do this work. And what I'm also very cautious about, which I believe I've shared with this board, is the fact that because we are a community-funded district, our cash flow, I have to watch our cash flow, right? And our cash flow is so important because I can budget whatever I want up here, right? Based on my assumptions, based on what I know. But we also know that cash is king. And what I have come to realize as I am working on the budget, as I'm closing the books, as I'm going back in time, looking at our cash, our historical cash flow, our actual cash flows, what I've noticed is that because we have two big lump sums that come in, right? We get a huge amount of our property taxes in December and then in April. By the time we get to November, for last year, for example, our cash flow was low over $4 million. What I get nervous about as your CBO is we start pulling our unrestricted dollars, and now we're running into cash flow issues. And now I'm going to turn around and go, I'm sorry, we have a cash flow issue. I need to borrow money from elsewhere. So I just want these things to be clear to the board, is that in my role as your CBO, trying to be proactive in addressing these issues ahead of time, our facilities needs, it's getting harder and harder as things are being pushed down the road. And as I mentioned, I believe that if you speak with our maintenance team, they will tell you the same things, is that so many of our deferred maintenance has been pushed down the line. And I would say my predecessor, who's not here and I can't speak for her, but she probably, I would say as a CBO from our standpoint, we're always looking at cash flow, right? We are always looking at, okay, where are we? Do we really have the funds to do all these projects? And I think that one of the things that I've noticed is with the projects we've got going on, like the track, we took from our general fund and we moved that into, Fund 40, our capital outlay projects, so that we can do these things. It's going to get harder and harder for us, and I understand that it's a toll on the community. For me, I'm at a point where if I have some idea of where the community is, then I can plan. And even if it means, to your point, what is that we need to, look at? Because since I've been here, I've been really looking at, okay, what are our priorities? What is it that we need to do? What are those things that are going to hold us that we can be proactive about, so we're not waiting and then just reacting? Because when we're reacting, it creates more work for everyone. It's actually costing us more in the long run. And so those are the things that I'm very careful and cautious about, just because I don't want us to get to a point where we've deferred so much because we're trying to pay for it out of what we have. But I think what the team here has hopefully shared over and over again, which is also another big concern of mine, is the fact that our facilities needs, it doesn't matter if we're community funded, if we're state funded, if we're LCFF, those needs will always exceed our funding. And so that is my fear, is that we keep kicking the can down the line, and now we're going to have more and more emergencies that are going to cost us more had we just address them. So I do want to share that in today's meeting was not to stress anyone out, to all of a sudden give you all this information and go, you have to make a decision. For me, the goal today was really to just get a pulse on the community, on the board, like, what are our next steps? Because as your CBO, I need to plan, I need to budget. And I am at a place where I'm trying to balance the two of addressing the needs of the facilities needs, addressing the needs of the district as a whole, overall, and yet be in a place where, how do I juggle all this and still do the work that needs to be done? Does that make sense?
It does make sense
Yeah.
to me.
Mm-hmm. So I think that what the team here, what we are looking for is just guidance in terms of what do John and I need to do next, in terms of, we know we have roughly $83 million worth of projects. If we don't get some ideas around, okay, how are, for us, it's about funding all these projects, right? We need to have an idea of, okay, how are we going to fund all these projects? Where are they going to come from? Are they going to come from the general fund? And if we start tapping into the general fund, I have to really watch the cash flow. And so these are all the things that are in my thoughts that I'm constantly thinking about in terms of facilities. And so I just wanted to share that with all of you guys and let you know that as your CBO, these are the thoughts I have every day.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate you. And I do want to acknowledge that I know since you've been here, it is worth not acknowledging that facilities have been your focus. And I know that you are trying to be proactive because we've had conversations about that. So I want to acknowledge that is clear on our end. I would hope that it is clear on our end. So, I'm
just going to add, and I think it's something Trustee Mora mentioned, which is absence of data. It's hard to make decisions. So what we're asking for is the survey component. Doesn't mean we're jumping into a bond right away, but it does provide us this other layer of information to see where the voters are, if that's something they would even consider supporting. Also, I appreciate the fact that it would tell us different levels of support. So maybe at a $10 or a $15, a $30, those things would help us understand potentially what funding is out there for us, and then further help us prioritize the list. If we know we can get 20 million or 30 million from the voters, okay, now we can come back to the list and say, okay, now where do we fit things in? So that's, I don't see it as a huge ask on that front. And then my only question just for Kay would be, $10,000 is still $10,000 potentially for a contract. Do we have that in our current budget? Where would that come out of, this 10,000?
that was my next question. Thank you. No, it was good.
It would come out of our unrestricted general fund, and as of we have budget that's for consultants and services. Did I anticipate on this 10,000 and full transparency? No. So is it included in the budget in terms of I planned for this? No. So it would just come out from our unrestricted dollars.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that as well. Okay, trustees. So in the effort of time, because we are over as well, I will ask again, is there a motion to give the district direction to proceed with a survey on a general obligation bond for a potential November ballot? I can't make a motion because I'm the pres, right? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to assume we don't have that. So,
Someone had mentioned a day or two. Is that something you want to consider?
well, we can consider it. But then this goes into we're asking staff that's already at the tail end of their school year to now try and find us another hour to discuss this. We have to have 24 hours notice. So really, Friday's our soonest opportunity. We're back here on Monday. And I just want everybody to think about all those kind of things because we're asking more work of everybody. So, and it's okay. If that's not what you want to do, that is ultimately our decision. But I do, we need to be mindful of that as well. And
I'm just curious, is 10,000 the hard line? Is there any options? Is there option A and B? I don't know. Or is that 10,000?
It's usually based on the size of your voting population, and I'm estimating 10,000. We just bill you directly from the third party that does it. So whatever that fee comes in, we'll send that bill on to you.
so whether you get 500 responses or 50, the cost is the cost.
Yeah, because it's the amount of time. Because
Sure,
if they're getting
just wanna
50,
make
they're
sure.
still making phone calls to try to
Yeah.
get to that 400 to 500.
Okay.
So it's
Just asking the question in case that was
Yep.
what anybody was thinking it. So, okay. So, I mean, and I know, I just don't know. I mean, I don't know what Friday's gonna, how it's really gonna change anything. I mean, other than having Trustee Simon here, there's just another, another potential, not a potential voice, but another voice. But I mean, what I'm sensing is that there's not a majority support for conducting a survey.
I was just going to answer what would be different. It's just for me, it would be the understanding of the outlook of whatever these 13 projects staggered by what we can actually accommodate by site, and then knowing how we're short to know what would be on a bond.
Except that,
But I understand
we're not at this
chicken
point.
and egg. I know,
Yeah.
but you asked what would we do differently Friday?
Except
Sorry.
but that's still, I mean, I understand that
Okay.
information is important, Sean. I completely agree with you. I think we all want that information. But I don't see that being, for me, it's not a deciding factor of whether or not we just conduct a survey.
Oh,
Because
okay.
the survey is just gonna tell us, do we then have the support to then take that next step to say, how much are we gonna ask for in a bond if we have the support? And then that's, to your point, is, well, we're gonna look at these 13 projects and what can the district afford and what state funding. Then we hone in and say, if we wanted to, I'm all hypothetical here, we would ask for a $15, assessment on a bond. But right now, I know how all our brains work because we're all very similar, and I know how we need the extra information to understand. But really, I don't think we need that piece right now to just decide whether or not to authorize funding for to conduct, is the word I'm looking for, to conduct a bond.
So here's a thought. If it's the $10,000 that we are debating about where and, how, I think we might have an idea. John?
Yeah, so I don't know, for what it's worth, I do anticipate that we are going to come in under budget still for the RLS project.
Okay,
And so there is some funding there that could be utilized for this.
okay.
Of
Thank you.
Contingency budget?
Correct.
Great, thank you for sharing that. That will make Trustee Kerr happy to hear.
I'm not
not
going
the
to say that
10.
the $10,000 is not what I am concerned about. It's just the perception the perception of us doing a survey on a bond in May for a November election, when we already know that there's going to be a transfer tax on. We know that there's going to be other things that's going to be on the ballot. And I just don't know how it's going to be perceived. And it's that perception of where we're asking for more money, possibly asking like, oh, so now the district is wants to see if we're going to be good for a bond because they need more money now. So it's like, when is it? It's kind of like, because I hear it all the time. It's like, when are they not going to ask for any more money? I mean, because people are.
Well, and I think it's true, and I think because we do have a healthy tax base, all the years I spent working with Give Big, we struggle with that constantly. Why are you raising money? You guys make tons of money in taxes, and I think it is. It's a lot of perception. So I understand what you're saying.
And it is, and it's also about educating, because the answer to that is 80% goes to salaries and compensation. So you're left with 20% to take care of a whole entire school district, which is not a lot of money. And, the elementary school is a perfect example of a building being the needs of that. Every year, the needs get greater at that, I would imagine, at that site, because it's one of the older ones. So,
But I'd be willing to change my thoughts about this if you all felt like we should do a survey. I mean,
I actually just worry about timing. So I like, why right now, but why wait 2 years? But there's just I think a lot of angst in our community about deferred maintenance. And like you said, there's a lot of perception that we are overfunded and the city is underfunded. But I'd be willing to, going back to put it on the ballot, like, this is data that we could use. It's not us making a decision. It is our community, and we are. So now I'm swaying the other way. We are looking for our community to give us input, because who knows if we're actually hearing all the different birds chirping, as you mentioned before. So I guess I would put a motion.
I mean, we're not going to ballot, though, remember,
Yeah,
right
no.
now.
This
Right
is
now,
just
it's
a survey.
So-
It's just,
I can't believe I'm going back that way, but I'm like, okay, well, how do I know what everyone's thinking? So I think I know, but this would tell us. So I would put forth a motion to approve a contract for a survey. I don't know how I'm supposed to, what else I need to include in that motion?
that's fine, not to exceed $10,000 is what needs to be in
Not
that.
to include $10,000.
Not to exceed.
Exceed, sorry, not to
Not to
include.
exceed.
Yeah.
Okay. I do need a second.
I'm going to second because I think Kay is amazing, and her impassioned speech, and I know how much she wants to make things the best she can. And if this is something that she truly believes might give us an answer and find a solution, I'm not comfortable. I won't say 100%, but I really believe in Kay and your team. And I think if that's what we need to do, I'm like you, I'm still very skeptical, but if that's what we need to do, I'm going to
appreciate
second
that.
the motion.
Okay. And I would also agree, I mean, I agree with that, but I do, personal feelings aside, I do think it's this is something that's going to affect the community, so the community should be weighing in on it. Yes, we are the financial stewards of it, but it is a community issue. I have no doubt that community is going to come through loud and clear one way or another. That's the one thing that I will stand by.
You will know.
We will know. So I have a motion and I have a second. And now I'm going to say, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
There you go.
The motion passes. So staff is directed to proceed with a contract not to exceed $10,000 for a survey. Survey only for all of our thousands of listeners only. We're just conducting a survey. That's just the first step of many. Thank you for your.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So does anyone then on our board see the survey questions before they go out, or how does that?
I'm
how
glad
does
you brought that
proceed?
up, because I was going to mention that earlier. So the next step is the obvious, designing the survey and coming up with the questions. Like I said, most surveys are pretty general and have very similar questions, talking about broad projects, broad tax rates. But we do incorporate, feedback from district staff, superintendent, CBO, board members can be involved in that. We don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, but we would welcome, we could show you what the survey looks like.
That would be great.
Again, with the caveat that we try to let the experts design the survey and do it and what has worked. So we'll take your advice and try to filter it in there. One thing I did want to mention too is it is possible, depending on the length of the survey, to ask about competing tax measures. We've done this before, so the question would be to the survey respondents: if you knew the city or the county or the transportation agency was doing a tax, would you still support a school tax? So you just get more information, and that's what we're doing.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I am sorry that we went over. You know us, and we like to pontificate in the positive and think and ask questions. And I'm very grateful that you stuck with us to go through it. And thank you, everybody, for being here. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn today's meeting?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, meeting adjourned at 7:10 p.m. Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna keep these.